I think this week I saw about 5 or 6 miracles here at your church. There's a miracle on Fountain Street. It happens a lot. Now, to cultivate an appreciation for the miraculous, it's very strong medicine. It is both preventative and restorative. Cynicism will give you ulcers if you let it. But you got to see miracles in order to put things into perspective. And it's fine if you don't believe in miracles. I am, of course, not here to tell you what to believe, but I assure you that they happen. It's not my fault that the religionists and the snake oil peddlers changed the meaning of the word miracle into some kind of childish supernatural thing. The cultivation of an ability to observe miracles. This is part and parcel also of the interim tasks of an interim church. I believe in the interim tasks the way that a physician believes in a course of antibiotics. I believe in the interim tasks the way that maybe a physical therapist believes in kettlebells. They make you stronger. They're tools, and they work if you work them. The interim is a holy time in the life of a church. And we're right in the heart of tasks 3, 4, and 5. Interim task 3, illuminating the multiple dimensions of leadership, who leads. Task 4, renewing our connections with other organizations and fellow travelers. Food for the journey. And task 5 is applying everything that we've learned together to the future as we catch a glimpse of what's coming. We're figuring out what's necessary, what's possible, and who's going to take responsibility for the work. So it became clear to me pretty early on, historically speaking, the life of this church, studying you and who you are, that this church was at its spiritual best, at its zenith, when the co-op, when the congregation, the cooperative union of the church was powerful. So the leadership and the strength of the church was to be found in the membership, in the committees, okay, to speak plainly. The co-op owners are the members of the church. And this church became a juggernaut for social change, for local justice and spiritual direction when the campus was filled to bursting with human beings. And not just the members of the church. That's something that people get confused about. People who have memories of this place being absolutely filled, they oftentimes will retroactively rework those memories and assume that all of those humans were members. That is not the case. The doors of the church ought never be closed to those in need. And the history of this place is the history of members doing powerful things and making powerful change. So my job is to help give you everything that we can, that the staff can, in order to enable you to bring your ideas to life. You do not need my good ideas. I think I've got a lot of good ideas. I think I have 3 or 4 before I get out of bed in the morning. But then I come to this church, and then walking from one side of the social hall to the other, I hear tell of 3 better ideas from the lips of the members of the church. That's where the gold is. So one of the things that this church is uniquely established to do, this place was designed to do this. It was custom, sort of spec-built to do this, is to provide hospitality to the city, to show hospitality to strangers. This week I saw the church building coming alive at odd hours. There was a cadre of local protesters and justice activists, about a dozen members of this church included in there. Their hearts were broken by their government's ongoing support of genocide in the Middle East. And they gathered here together early in the morning to speak and then march. They march, and they are marching as we speak, many miles from Grand Rapids to Lansing to speak out against war, against genocide, and in support of the people of Palestine. They asked me to walk with them. I graciously offered them my thoughts and prayers, and I declined. It's a long ways. But that same day, that Thursday, we invited, that evening, 1,500 folks here to gather in the sanctuary and listen to a Christian preacher whose heart is broken by Christian nationalism, Reverend Nadia Boltz-Weber. And she came and she invited over 1,000 of our dear friends and neighbors to come here and to sing their sacred songs and practice their faith, practice their Christian faith in this space, and remember who they were called to be. And then on Friday, this day before yesterday, we welcomed a family here to have a memorial gathering for a member of their family, a member of our community who died under unspeakable, tragic circumstances. This family halfway through their journey through hell, they needed a place to pause and catch their breath. And this was able to be that place for them. The courage to say yes to these things, to say yes to helping, to offering, to opening, and to showing hospitality, this is always a choice, and it's a choice that has to be made by the members of the church, and it's a miracle. It's a miracle. When John Lennon was interviewed by Rolling Stone magazine, when John Lennon from the Beatles, yes, that John Lennon, he was one of his last interviews with Rolling Stone. He was at the height, the Beatles were at the height of their fame, and he revealed that he'd only written 2 songs spontaneously based on his experiences. The rest of his music was, quote, made to order, is what he said. The 2 songs that he wrote from his own lived experience and pain were Strawberry Fields Forever and the 1965 title song to a movie was called simply enough, Help. Help. This song was written written from his despair, from Lennon's despair and isolation. He had found himself in the driver's seat of a car that had turned into a rocket ship, and he was terrified by his celebrity, and he was terrified of the alienation and loneliness that it brought to his life. And this terror crystallized into the song Help. He needed someone outside of himself to see him. He had everything, but everything wasn't what he was looking for. There are 2 polarities that are working on human society, and they're at work in our city, they're at work in our church, and they're at work in our hearts. And on one end of the polarity is alienation, separation of the individual from the greater body, and on the other is community. And we vacillate between the 2. But community is as necessary as air and water to our survival. Humans die without community. Violence and scarcity and isolation and division and xenophobia and racism and fascism, these are the weapons of alienation. When people discover this sense that they can't seem to get enough, whatever enough means to them, they get suspicious and isolated, and they become alienated from community. If you ask them, how much is going to be enough for you? They become restless, and sometimes they become violent. People in isolation, in alienation, are like caged animals. They're pacing and lashing out. And I hear them. I hear them. They rage. They lash out at whoever's nearest at hand. They lash out at people who have less than them, at the unhoused, at the homeless people who sleep around here. They blame the poorest people on earth for the pain in their lives. In their confusing isolation, I ask them, when will you have enough? They angrily point their fingers at people who have even less. I imagine every cardboard sign on the hands of every man, woman, and child by a freeway off-ramp in America, these cardboard signs asking the simple question, when do you have enough? In isolation, in alienation, there is no answer to that question, because the thing that you are hungriest for, you cannot obtain on your own. And the shame that comes along with alienation can destroy a person's soul. I mean, why do you think these roving gangs of fascists, these jackbooted ICE agents, all newly minted, all just newly snatched up out of places of despair, why do you think they cover their faces? Why do you think they wear masks, these ICE bands? They're shamed. They're shamed. These men they're given a badge and a gun, and they're told up to round up anyone who looks like they might have come from another country, which is an insane thing to ask an American to do. You've seen probably a few westerns, heist movies. What the bad guys, the bandits and the gangsters, what they do, they cover their face. In their guts, they know that the wages of violence is alienation from community. They know in their bones that kidnapping living, breathing humans, stealing these souls out of their communities, it's separating parents from children and children from parents, kidnapping people, ripping them apart from their communities. They know that it is a crime, and they themselves are terrified of the cost of alienation. So they hide their faces. They're alienated. Now, if their job was to be guardians or protectors, to provide safety and security, to serve and protect, or something like that, they would make themselves visible and known to everyone who could see them. Here I am, here to help. So the opposite of alienation, the other end of that binary, is community. Community, it's the beating heart of the human species. It cannot really be bought or sold or purchased into. I saw some billionaires trying to have themselves a community wedding, I think in Venice. It was a farce. It was a clown show. It was like pretending at community. It was all so saccharine and unreal. You can't buy your way into community. You can't do it. All the money in the world can't do it. Community is what sustains us through the terrible circumstances caused by alienation. When I lived in Palestine, in the West Bank, the daily horrors of the Israeli military occupation that had been going on for decades, I saw the community in stark relief, because it's what gave them resiliency. So when these Israeli soldiers, of course, wearing masks, right, they would drive into a village in the early morning hours, and they would shut off the wells. They would go and turn off all the water and protect those wellheads with guns. The people who'd been dealing with this for decades, they would begin quietly filling buckets with the water pressure that was left, filling buckets and jugs and vases and things. Now, I grew up in a rural part of this state, and I grew up knowing that when in a dire emergency, when water was scarce, before the well loses pressure, you fill up the bathtub. That's what you fill up. You fill up the bathtub, and then there's your water. And they had bathtubs, but they didn't fill their bathtubs. They filled buckets and vases and things like that. They said, we have to be able to move our water up and down the stairs and throughout the village, because this person, that person's going to run out of water first. They always run out of water first. We have to, Miss Bakir upstairs is elderly, and she'll run out of, Mr. Amin's got 5 children. He's going to run out of water first. So they didn't fill their bathtubs. They filled buckets. When I read stories from history, I was just reading a first-person narrative from the siege of Sarajevo. It was a military siege and bombardment. It lasted 4 years, from 1992 to 1996, during the Bosnian War. What stood out to me was that the survivors, the stories of survivors from that siege, what they were saying was that it wasn't their guns and their ammunition that saved them, because many of them had firearms, but they were useless, bordering on stupidity in the face of jet planes and bombers and mortar shells. It wasn't stockpiling rations ahead of the war, because they had time. They knew that the siege was coming, And many of them were, just as today in the West, we have people who are these preppers, right? Who build bunkers and stockpile food. That did not help them. The one actual useful thing that the survivors agreed on that carried them through 4 years of terror and immiseration was community groups. For one woman, it was her knitting circle, of all things. Her knitting circle became the core group that gathered food and medicine to keep each other alive. And for another man, it was his amateur radio club. It was his ham radio kit and the communications and community that he was able to build and the people he knew through that. And for another, while the bombs and the fascist occupying armies fell upon them, they gathered in the basements of their mosques and churches. And that was where they found it. And one woman even spoke about how it was her children's kindergarten teacher who went from house to house, continuing the children's lessons and helping them achieve some kind of normalcy while making sure they had enough to eat and clothing to wear. It was community. This is what you build here at Fountain Street. That's what you do. That's your purpose. You practice radical hospitality. And of course you are, because you have to. Because in a spiritual community that refuses to be tethered to any one sect or creed or identity, you naturally manifest the best values common to them all. And radical hospitality is at the very heart of all human religious traditions that seek to negotiate the cultural experience of the human species through the lens of the miraculous. Community is a miracle. It's a miracle because it cannot be bought or sold or purchased into, and because it saves us from alienation. The answer is the will to intervene, to help, to be in community. That's the whole miracle. The willingness to say, yes, we are the ones that you've been waiting for, and you're the ones that we've been waiting for. This place is going to be a place that says yes when everybody else says no. That's the answer to the hatred and the isolation that is boiling over out there. I'm going to continue as best as I'm able to fan the flames of radical hospitality here in this place. A place where everyone will find a welcome, because it was established in the city of Grand Rapids as the People's Cathedral. And because the ancestors knew that the city would need a place that would say yes when everyone else said no. A place where all would find a welcome, so long as they were willing to put a hand to the plow and sacrifice on behalf of beloved community. And I want to speak very briefly, just before I close, about the people we encounter who seem to oppose these values, because there's a risk. We will encounter takers. People who view this place as an opportunity to flex their own personal agendas, people who desire only to take and feed their own egos. And okay, this is another symptom of the disease of alienation. We can heal them. We can heal them. We will face the cruel words of strangers. You have for years. Good God, the Baptists used to write books about you and all sorts of stuff. I've read them. You're not going to read them. They've given in, these people who lob these insults, they've given in to the terrible lie, perhaps, that they're self-made or that there's only so much to go around. Or they look on a community of hospitality with confusion and anger and contempt and bitterness. Because why should this place shine so brightly while they themselves have to sit in darkness and loneliness? That's alienation speaking. You can see these people on social media. I don't recommend it. They see a place practicing hospitality and it triggers pain in them. It is despairing to see. But when you understand who they are and what they're experiencing, it begins to make sense. We see people who grow angry at the practice of hospitality. They're lost. And there's a child inside them that is crying, who's become separated from their families. the nastiness on social media it's a child screaming to be seen. They've lost their grown-ups. The will to help, the will to intervene, and the will to say yes, to show hospitality to the stranger, that is real religion. That's it. In every time and under every circumstance, in every language and culture that has ever appeared on the face of this small and precious planet, we will continue to hone these practices together through the interim process. We'll explore the richness and we'll have some introspection about this. We'll fine-tune the way that we practice hospitality. We'll sharpen it into a surgical instrument that can remove pain and despair and alienation from people's lives. We'll do it here in Grand Rapids, very, very much so, yeah. And then we'll write it all down so we can share it with others. This place is too precious to be kept a secret. Your practices are too powerful to be a mystery, I think. So thank you for having enough this week, and thank you for practicing hospitality. You did it. You did it. Thousands of people here this week. Thousands, just this week. It changed lives. It changed history. And all of this because you are possessed of the radical will to intervene and say yes. This is a miracle. That's the whole miracle. That's the whole sermon. Amen.